it's Megan. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be sharing with you some make-ahead breakfast recipes for this crazy back-to-school season. So to start off with this morning, I'm going to be making English muffin bread. We're also going to be making a Cheddar Bay biscuit egg bake. We're going to be making some applesauce cinnamon bread, bran muffins, some breakfast burritos, and I think that's everything. So we're gonna, instead of doing each recipe individually, I'm just gonna kind of show you how I do all of these things in kind of like one big cooking session. So we're gonna start off with our English muffin bread so that it has time, it can be rising while I'm working on some of the other recipes. So to do that, I'm going to get out my big mixer. Okay, I'm gonna attach my dough hook. And in here, I'm going to add a tablespoon of yeast, a tablespoon of sugar, and 3 cups of warm water, and I'm going to let that bloom. Okay, so there's 2 cups of warm water, and here's the third. Okay, there's my 1 tablespoon of yeast, and my 1 tablespoon of sugar. So I'm just going to mix this together really quick. Now, because I am using active yeast instead of instant yeast, I'm going to let this sit for about 5 minutes to bloom so that the yeast gets nice and activated. If you have active dry yeast, you don't need to let it bloom. You can just start adding the rest of your ingredients. So I'm going to let this bloom for about 5 or 10 minutes, grab the rest of my ingredients for a few other recipes, and then I will continue on making this dough. Okay, so I've let my yeast proof. So let me show you what it looks like when it's ready. See, it's all nice and super bubbly. So now I'm going to add the rest of my ingredients to this, and then I'm going to cover it and let it rise while I start working on some of the other recipes. So this makes 2 loaves of bread. The next thing I need to add is a tablespoon of salt. And 5 3/4 cup of flour. I'm going to start with like 2 or 3. Let that mix in, and then I'll slowly add in the rest until I get it to the right consistency. This bread dough is going to be very shaggy and sticky, so don't add extra flour to it or else it'll mess up like the crumb of the bread, which is what makes it taste like an English muffin. Since I'm using a lot of flour in my recipes today, I just have my big giant 5-gallon bucket of flour just over here on a stool, and I'll be scooping out of that instead of having to like constantly refill my smaller flour container. Okay, so here's 2 and 3. So I'll get this mixing and then add in the rest of my flour. So here's what the dough looks like. It's pretty shaggy and sticky. That's normal. So I'm going to take out my dough hook, put the lid on, and then let it rest as it rises. Once it has doubled in size, then we will shape it into loaves and get it going for its second raise and then cooking it. Okay, I just took a few minutes to grind up some wheat so that we have some whole wheat flour for a few more recipes, and just took some time to tidy things up. Something that's super helpful on days like today is to pull all of your recipes. I like to have mine printed just so that they're all here and I can easily look at them. And then I also like to go through, if I have enough time, and list kind of like the different steps and pieces that I need to do and decide what order I need to do them in. So I knew I wanted to get the bread done first so that it could be rising while I was working on some of these other projects. So the next thing I'm going to be working on is to soak the bran in the bran buds for the bran muffins. So I just have these mason jars that I've already pre-measured things into, and I just keep this in my food storage so I know, so I already have it pre-measured since I buy the ingredients for these in bulk. So what you're going to need is 2 cups of bran buds, which are, they look like this. And then you're going to need 4 cups of bran flakes. So I already have those measured out. So I'm just gonna put them in my big bowl. This recipe, you should be using a giant bowl with a lid because it makes enough for 4 dozen muffins, but you can keep the batter in the fridge for up to a month and just kind of scoop out and make fresh muffins every week if you want to, or however often you want to. So I always like to make sure that I have this bowl clean when I'm trying to do this recipe. So right now you can probably hear in my microwave, I just have some water in there to get to a boiling temperature. So I need 2 cups of water. So I'm just gonna pour that boiling water over the cereal and let that soak in, stirring it every, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes until it has cooled back down to room temperature. So my water is boiling, so I'm just gonna slowly pour it over. I'm just going to stir them to make sure everything's getting covered. Okay, so I'm just going to set this to the side and stir it every 10 to 15 minutes just until it has cooled back down. So while the bran mixture is cooling and my bread dough is rising, the next thing I'm going to do is put together my 2 breakfast casseroles. One of them I'm going to use as filling for breakfast burritos, and the other one I'm just going to have as a breakfast casserole. I am going to cook them all the way through and then kind of show you what we're going to do from there. I just spent a little bit of time browning some sausage and getting a few other of like the cold ingredients that I'm going to need for my next 2 recipes. So first I'm going to start off with the breakfast casserole that I'm going to use for filling for my breakfast burritos. So to start off with, I'm going to line the bottom of this pan with tater tots. You can just kind of throw them in there. I like lining them up because I like a lot of potato in my breakfast burrito. So it also doesn't take too long to like really line them up. Make sure that you grease the bottom of your pan. The original recipe says to use a 32-ounce bag. And I never actually use a full bag. I always have like this many left. So I just save these in case I do other breakfast burritos or have them as like a small side for a dinner or something. So I'm gonna set this aside and put the work on the egg mixture that goes on top of it. Okay, so on top of this, I'm going to add my sausage. So I just ground this and then I just put it on this paper towel to help soak up all the grease. Also with this mixture, you can do you can cook up some onions and some bell peppers. That's really good. We really like that as well. I just don't have any on hand. So I'm just going with sausage today. Okay, and then on top of this, you're gonna add 2 cups of shredded cheese. I'm just using this Mexican blend, but you can use whatever kind of blend you want to. Now I'm going to set this aside and work on the egg mixture that goes on top. Okay, so here in my bowl for my egg mixture, I'm going to need 6 eggs. Okay, and to that I'm going to add 1 cup of milk and a 1/2 cup of sour cream. With sour cream, I always kind of just estimate. Okay, for seasonings, I'm going to add some salt and pepper, and then since I'm not adding any onions to my meat mixture, I'm going to add some onion powder as well. Here's some salt, and then here's some pepper. Now I'm just going to whisk all of this up until everything is nice and incorporated, and then I'll pour it over the top of the casserole. Now in the original directions, it says that you can, it wants you to let this soak overnight. If you do that, your potatoes will definitely start to like crumble a little bit more and it all kind of becomes one cohesive casserole. But I always I never want to wait, so I always just cook it right away. Your potatoes are a little bit more together still, like they still taste like a potato and have the texture of a tater tot, but I usually don't have time or want to wait. But you can make this ahead of time and let it soak overnight if you want to make this the night before, and then pop it in the oven in the morning. It does take about an hour to cook. I have my oven right now at 350. You're going to cook it for 25 minutes covered, and then you're going to cook it for you're going to take the foil off and cook it for another 25 minutes. Okay, so now that this is all mixed together, I'm just going to pour it over my casserole. So if you want to, you can press things down so that everything gets covered. So I'm gonna pop this in the oven, put some foil over it, pop it in the oven, and cook it for 25 minutes. And while that's starting to cook, I'll assemble my second casserole so I can get that in the oven as well. Okay, my next recipe is a new to me recipe. It's a Cheddar Bay biscuit egg bake. So like the biscuits from Red Lobster. Okay, so to start out, I'm going to work on my egg mixture because that's gonna go in the bottom of my pan. So I'm just gonna use the same bowl because it has basically the same ingredients. Okay, so into here I'm gonna add 12 eggs. Okay, to my eggs, I'm going to add half a cup of milk. And then for seasonings, it calls for a teaspoon of Cajun seasoning. I don't have any, and my kids don't really love spice. So I'm just gonna add onion powder and garlic powder. The original recipe does call for onions and garlic, but I'm just gonna skip that today and just do the powdered form. Okay, I'm also gonna add some salt and pepper. So here's some pepper. And then here's some salt. So on top of this egg mixture, you're going to make the Red Lobster biscuits. You can do that by buying a just a boxed mix of them from the store. I just have a homemade recipe that I'm going to use, and I'll include it as well as all of the other recipes from today's video down in the description box. Okay, so now down into my sprayed casserole pan, I'm just going to pour my egg mixture. And then I'm going to get to working on my biscuit mix. For your biscuits, you're going to need 2 cups of Bisquick. If you don't have Bisquick, there are also recipes online to make it on your own, just with flour and like baking powder and stuff. Okay, in addition to that, you're going to need 2/3 cup of milk. And then you're also going to need a half cup of cheddar cheese. But again, I'm just using this Mexican blend because that's what I have. Okay, I'm just going to mix this with a fork because that's how I always make this for some reason. And then if you are using the boxed mix, it also comes with like a seasoning packet where you will melt some butter and add the seasoning packet to it to get like the yummy topping part of the biscuit. You don't need that quite yet. For mine, I'm just going to make up some garlic butter. But all you need to do is after it's all mixed together, I'm going to just titch more milk because it's kind of dry. Okay, now that's all mixed together, I'm going to drop just dollops of the biscuit dough on top of the egg mixture. Okay, so this is going to cook in the oven for 30 minutes. After it's cooked for 15 minutes, you're going to pull it out and you're going to brush the garlic butter mixture. So either the seasoning packet with the butter or just plain garlic butter if you're just making a homemade recipe. You're going to brush that on top of the biscuits and then cook it for the final 15 minutes. You can also add ham to the recipe. That's what the original recipe says. I'm skipping that today and just I'm going to do an egg mixture. So let me get tidied up and we'll get working on the next step for our bread recipe. Okay, so this bread dough has definitely doubled in size. So I'm going to divide it up into 2 loaves and get it into my bread pans and get that going on its second rise while I work on the muffins. First I'm going to just spray my bread pans. If you have rings, I would suggest taking them off at this point because this dough is super sticky. So I'm just going to loosely divide the dough in half and then put half in one pan, half in the other pan. Because the dough is so sticky, it's really hard to actually get anything to be shaped into like an actual loaf. So this is about half. So I'm just going to loosely kind of get it into my pan. Kind of push it out a little bit. Okay, that was definitely not even. So I'm gonna take a chunk out of this one, stick it over onto this other side. Again, just kind of stretch it out so that it fills the pan pretty well. So I'm gonna go wash my hands. Then I'm gonna cover these and put them probably just on top of my oven since it's cooking the casseroles, and that'll help them raise a little bit quicker. Once they get to the top, then we will pop them in the oven to bake. I don't always do this, but when I work with dough, I do like to wash my dishes, like my bowl and my paddle attachment, as soon as I can. Otherwise it gets hard and crusty on it, and it doesn't actually take that long to wash it while it's still like sticky and fresh. It's a lot easier to clean. So I just finished washing my bowl, and earlier I washed my paddle attachment after I finished with that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, we're going to wait for that dough to rise. Then I'm going to put it into a 350-degree oven for 25 to 30 minutes. So my oven's already at that temperature, so as soon as it has gotten up to the top of the bread pans, I'll just pop it in. Okay, and then next we're going to keep working on our bran muffins. So my bran mixture has cooled off. It's all soaked and ready to go. And like I mentioned, this recipe makes enough for 4 dozen muffins. And this is one of those recipes that actually is accurate. Lots of times I feel like when it says it makes a certain amount of muffins, it's either way less or way more, but this one is actually pretty spot on. Okay, to our mixture, we're gonna add 4 cups of buttermilk. I don't have buttermilk today, so I'm just going to use regular milk and add a little bit of vinegar to sour it. Okay, so here's 2 cups. There's 4 cups. Okay, and then to that I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of melted butter and a 1/2 cup of applesauce. Okay, so here's my applesauce. And here's my butter. So I'm gonna get all of those mixed together. Next I'm going to add 2 cups of sugar. Because these are muffins that we eat for breakfast, remember that first off the 2 cups is spread across 48 muffins. So it's actually not that much sugar per muffin. But whenever I make muffins, I really like to substitute monk fruit sweetener for sugar because it has a low glycemic index, and so it doesn't spike blood sugar in the same way that sugar does. So I'm gonna add 2 cups of that. Sometimes I add 1 cup of sugar and 1 cup of monk fruit. It just kind of depends on what I have on hand. So I'm gonna add the sugar or the monk fruit sweetener, I guess. And then I'm going to add 4 eggs to the mixture as well. So as you can see, this bowl is getting really full, so it's really important to make sure that you are using a big bowl with a lid, if you have one. Next, we're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla, 4 teaspoons of baking soda, a teaspoon of salt, and 5 cups of whole wheat flour. So I'm going to start with my 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Then I'm going to add my teaspoon of salt and my 4 teaspoons of baking soda. So my baking soda recently has been super clumpy, so I'm just running it through a sifter just to make sure no more clumps are in it. So I'm going to mix these in really quick, and then I'm going to mix in my 5 cups of freshly milled whole wheat flour. I used hard white wheat for this when I was grinding. The wheat berries that I used were hard white wheat, just because that's what I have on hand. So there's 2 and 4 and 5. So you just want to mix until everything is combined. Now, you can make these into muffins right away. Because my oven is full right now, because I'm still baking my casseroles and I'm going to also have bread in the oven, I'm just going to pop this in the fridge, let it continue to soak, and then I will scoop it out into my muffin tins and get it cooking. It'll probably be the last thing that I cook. I kind of like it better after it has sat for a little bit. So like the 2nd and 3rd and 4th batches that I make of the muffins after the first initial one, I usually like a little bit better just because it's had time to soak and incorporate really well together. Okay, the next recipe I'm going to be working on is the applesauce bread. So to start off, I'm going to need a 1/4 cup of oil. I'm going to use melted coconut oil today. Then you're also going to need 2 eggs. And then to this you're going to add 1/2 cup of sugar and a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. Similar to the bran muffins, I'm going to replace the regular sugar with monk fruit so it doesn't quite spike blood sugars quite as much. Okay, so I'm going to whisk that together. Okay, next I'm going to add a teaspoon of vanilla and a 1/4 cup of either buttermilk or sour cream. I'm just going to use regular milk this time. Okay, and then you're also going to add 1 cup of no sugar added applesauce. This is just some home canned applesauce that I didn't add any sugar to. Okay, next we're going to add our flour. So we're going to need 1 3/4 cup of whole wheat flour. You can substitute for white flour if you want to. So there's 1 3/4. To that we're also going to need a teaspoon of baking soda. Just like before, I'm just going to run it through my sifter really quick to make sure I don't have any clumps. I need a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. And same thing, it's also been getting clumps on me for some reason. So I'm going to run it through my sifter as well. Okay, next we need a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then a 1.5 tablespoons of cinnamon, and a teaspoon of nutmeg. This is smelling really, really good. Definitely smells like fall. We've been having some nice fall-like temperatures the last couple of days here in Montana, and it's been so lovely. Okay, now that that's all mixed together, you can just cook it here. I'm going to add these Hershey's cinnamon chips. You can usually find these in the fall time in the chocolate chip aisle. I'm just going to add 1/2 the bag, and then I'll save the other 1/2 for the next time I make it. Next, I'm just spraying this bread pan. I'm going to pour my mixture into it. Okay, so now that this is in its pan, as soon as I have some space in the oven, I'll pop it in there. It's going to cook at 350 for 45 to 60 minutes. Okay, I just pulled my English muffin bread out of the oven, so I have some room to put in the bran muffins. So I'm going to spray my nonstick silicone pans, and then I'm going to use my 3 tablespoon cookie scoop to put it into the muffin liners. And then once they are filled, I'm going to bump the temperature up on my oven to 375 and cook these for 15 minutes. Okay, so I just got the bran muffins in my applesauce bread. Still needs maybe 10 or 15 more minutes, so I'm just going to leave it in there with the muffins. And while those are cooking, I'm going to work on assembling my breakfast burritos. So basically all I'm going to do is just take a tortilla, cut a rectangular slice of the breakfast casserole, and then I'm going to roll it up, and then I'll wrap these up in plastic wrap, and then I'll put them all in a big freezer Ziploc bag, and then we can just pull out the ones as we need them. Okay, so I do have a little bit of extra casserole, so I'm just going to put this in a container, and somebody will just eat this for breakfast over the next couple of days. We like to top it with sour cream and salsa. With these, after we pull them out of the freezer, we'll just put them in the fridge to thaw overnight, and then after we cook them, we just pop them in the microwave for a couple minutes. You can also put them in the air fryer after that if you want it crispy, and then we just open them up and add some salsa and sour cream, or just put it on top if we were just eating it on a plate. Okay, and here is what our Cheddar Bay biscuit breakfast casserole looks like. You can see the biscuits right here. I topped it with the garlic butter. I just did that when it came all the way out instead of only halfway through. And I ended up needing to cook this for about 10-ish minutes longer than it originally said. But this looks super good. We'll just be eating this for breakfast this week. If you wanted to, you could cut it into individual squares, wrap those in plastic wrap, put them in a Ziploc freezer bag, and then you could just pop them out as you wanted to eat them for breakfast. So we're gonna be eating that for breakfast this week. Okay, so here's everything that I was able to get done today. I got my 2 loaves of English muffin bread and my loaf of cinnamon applesauce bread. I got 2 dozen bran muffins cooked, and they're all cooled and ready to go. Some will go into the freezer and some I'll keep out for snacks and breakfast this week. We got our 9 breakfast burritos done, and I'll just put these in a freezer bag. We also have 3 little servings of breakfast casserole that's left over. That wasn't quite the right shape to put in a tortilla. And then we have this entire 9x13 casserole of the Cheddar Bay Biscuit egg bake. So this egg bake we will eat this week for breakfasts. These breakfast casseroles I could freeze, or I might keep them and have them for easy lunches or breakfast options. All the burritos are going to go in the freezer. Half the muffins are going to go in the freezer. The English muffin bread I will cut into slices and put it in the freezer, and then we can either pull out slices as we want, or we can pull out a whole loaf. And then same with the applesauce cinnamon bread. I'll cut it into slices and then pop it in the freezer. And then we'll just either pull out slices or pull out the whole loaf when we're ready to eat it. So I'll have all of the recipes down in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week with a new video. Bye.